Praise the Lord. Here we are once again in our Revelation study, substituting Wednesday nights for your in-home service. Anyways, we're going to do Revelation chapter 12. This is an amazing chapter. There's so much to cover. I'm only going to really give you the headlines, or we'll be here for a while. But I'm going to try to give you all the headlines today. So in Revelation 12, we're introduced to the woman clothed with the sun, the child of the woman, the great red dragon, those who overcome, the Jews, those who flee to the wilderness, the 3 year, 6 month time frame, so the last 3.5 years of the tribulation once again, the serpent or Satan and his angels, Michael and his angels, the overcomers, those who keep Jesus' commandments. So I'm going to read the text and then we'll get into it together. Now, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So just to stop for a second. We just keep being introduced to this 42-month time frame, 3.5 years, however you want to say it, but this is really, Revelation deals with the last 3.5 years of Daniel's 70th week, okay? Verse 7, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was their place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who has accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they came, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place. There she is nourished for a time, times and half a times. Again, we're getting the 3.5 years there. From the presence of the serpent. The serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God, who have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So we're introduced to some real big sweeping pictures here, and I'm going to try to cover these with you today. So first we see the great sign, verses 1 through 2. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, and a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon in her feet, under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor. I'm having a hard time reading here, so I'll try to do better. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. So if we scan the scriptures to see where this kind of imagery comes, because I think that's important. I think we have to let the Bible give us a view of interpreting itself with other internal evidence. And so in Genesis 37, 9 through 11, behold, he dreamed yet another dream. So this is talking about Joseph. And he told it to his brethren and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. So we find the same kind of imagery with the sun, the moon, and the stars. In this case representing Jacob, Rachel, and the patriarchs, the leaders of the tribes of Israel. So with this imagery in mind, I think it's fair to say that we're talking about Israel. The woman is Israel. The 12 stars are the 12 tribes. And so I know there's different interpretations of that. I'm just giving you mine. So the next thing is the fiery red dragon, which is verses 3 through 6. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. And his tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Yeah, many people see this as when Satan is going back to Satan's fall and him taking a third of the angels with him, and they all fell together. I accept that as a good explanation. Like I said, with everything in Revelation, if it's not crystal clear, if it's, when we get into speculation, we need to be able to just carry it like it's speculation and say, this is what I think it is, instead of saying this is what it is. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there 1,260 days, or 42 months. So this dragon is later identified as Satan in verse 9. Verse 9 reads, So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So that's him, okay? The heads may represent empires that he had deceived. The horns typically represent authority, or the actual rulers that rule these empires that were taken captive by his deceit. So I'm keeping it in the framework of what we've been presented with here, of the fiery red dragon is Satan, that he deceives the whole world, and these 7 heads and 10 horns seem to point to empires and rulers. I'm just going to say it that way. That's what I think. We'll find out. One commentator indicated that the number 7, referring to the 7 heads, is a number meaning complete, and it may refer to the fullness of evil that the devil represents. And again, when there's these different views that come out, and that I selected this one on purpose because it's appropriate. Even if it does mean 7 empires and 10 rulers, it also can represent the completeness of evil, the fullness of evil. I mean, one doesn't exclude the other. It could be this and this. It doesn't have to be this or this. Okay. So the woman flees to the wilderness for 3.5 years. Excuse me, let me back up. I missed a point here. The dragon was there to devour the child of the woman, and we're saying that the woman is Israel, so the child is Jesus Christ. The child was born to rule the nations. Following his earthly ministry, Jesus was caught up to heaven and remains there until his return to rule and reign. So you can see these are big picture presentations of this vision here, but we're also being brought back to this 42-month time frame as well. So don't get lost with this, because there's so many people that are trying to chart Revelation, and they go this seal, this seal, this seal, this trumpet, this vial, and then they're trying to put all this stuff in a chronology, and I think that's where we get into trouble. I don't think that's possible, especially with this chapter, when we're going if it is Israel, the woman is Israel, and the birth of Christ, and his earthly ministry, his ascension, and his return, and the devil's fall, the taking of the angels, rebelled against God, and these are all big picture. This is covering massive amounts of time by our standards, and but again, we're taken back to the prophetic side of it, which is pointing us to the last 3.5 years, which, remember, that 3.5 years is triggered by the abomination of desolation, the Antichrist standing in the holy place and setting up his image and declaring himself to be God, a God, not the God. He wants to be the God, which is like Satan, but he's not the God. He's not even a God. There's only one God, but you understand the language, the imagery here. So the woman flees through the wilderness for 3.5 years. Most likely this wilderness is in the country of Jordan, which Daniel reveals in his prophecies will escape the reign of the final expression of the satanic empires, the beast empires, the statue empires, whatever. So Daniel reveals a succession of empires through the imagery of a statue. These empires begin with Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon and continue to present day, in my opinion. I know there's a view that they represent Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Then there's this 2,000-year break, and then there's going to be a revived Roman Empire. I don't really see it that way. I don't really believe it that way. You're going to see my reasoning when we get into Revelation 17 and 18 that there are expressions throughout every age of this Antichrist empire. It's always been there, and it's always affected Israel. And when we hold that view, in the same with Babylon, Mystery Babylon, the early Christian commentators called it Rome. Pagan Rome, not Christian Rome, pagan Rome. Then it became Christian Rome, and some commentators, refer to Jerusalem as Babylon. There's all these different constructs, and I just want to say to all of them, yes. So anytime there is an expression, a religious expression, whether it's paganism or whether it's pseudo-Christianity or Islam or whatever, it's fitting into the Babylonian system, and it's fitting into the statue and these empires, these succession of empires, because when we look at the empires going one after the other, I don't know why all of a sudden there's this 2,000-year break, or why don't we keep it, the continuity of it? So we'll talk about that now. Daniel chapter 2 verses 31 through 35, Thou, O king, so Daniel is interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of gold, his breast and his arms of silver, and his belly, his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron, part of clay. Thou sawest till the stone that was cut without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were on the iron and clay, break them in pieces. Then the iron and the clay and the brass and the silver and the gold broken pieces together became like chaff of the summer wind threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them, and the stone that smote that the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So please read the whole chapter. Whenever I read a portion of a chapter, a verse, I would always encourage you to go back and read the whole chapter and capture the context, and it will help you understand it. So Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. The stone that's cut out, I think, is clearly as Christ. I don't think it's his first coming. I think it's his second coming, and I know there's going to be some debate on that. The preterists and those that view Revelation as history, not as prophecy, or prophetic or future foretelling, are going to have that view that was when Jesus came and set up his kingdom and it replaces all the others. The amillennialists, they believe we're in the millennial now, and I don't agree with that. I respect those that believe that, and it's going to be one of those things where we'll see. But the great red dragon wants to be the ruler of the world and presents himself that way. So he did did so when he tempted Jesus in the wilderness. He said, worship me and I'll give you all these. All what? I think it's all these empires. Is that he's basically set up these empires to all overlap the land of Israel, because he wants to go there and declare himself to be God. He wants to undo the prophecy of the seed of the woman, and then all the prophecies that follow that concerning the Messiah. And of course he fails. But I think if we can think about this statue and really pay attention to the stone that's cut out strikes the feet. It doesn't strike the legs or the torso or the arms or the head. If you want to destroy an image, you just hit it in the head, I guess. But it hits in the feet. So this to me is the return of Jesus at the end of the age. So you'll have to excuse my voice this time of year. Lots of pollen, and we're having a good time. I should have grabbed some water. So I believe that, again, that Satan, when he's tempting Jesus, is talking about these empires. That if Jesus would just worship the devil, then he would give them to him, which I think was a lie to begin with. It's the whole thing, so everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. But Jesus knows that he was born to be the son of David, the Messiah would come and rule and reign and reestablish the kingdom. And he knows that if he fulfills God's will, he's going to inherit the nations, not just not what Satan's offering. So again, there doesn't appear to be a break in the timeline. I think it's important for us to see it that way. Most dispensationalists are looking for a revived Roman Empire. I think that's a mistake. I think, well, let me say it this way. I believe that every generation is to live and behave themselves as if they're the last generation. In other words, our commission is to get the gospel out and make disciples of all nations. And in the kind of the impetus or the motivation for that is our time is limited. Well, Jesus might not come for another 10,000 years, or he might come this weekend. I don't know. But I know that I'm not going to last that another 10,000 years. So my motivation should be not that I'm being prepared to leave before anything bad happens, but that I'm here to spread the good news, to preach the gospel. The empires that held within their borders Israel within their borders is Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, then Byzantium, then the Ottomans, and then there's yet a seventh. And with this view, the last one being the Ottoman Empire, an Islamic empire, or caliphate as they call it, I think fits better with what Daniel and Revelation are saying. And it also recognizes the region as opposed to an ethnicity. So whenever we, and I don't like to think about Ottomans as Arabs, because the Ottoman Turks they're definitely not Arabs, and it's not about Arabs and Jews and all that. No, that's not what's being presented here. What's being presented here is this fiery red dragon that's deceiving these empires, these nations. And even within that context, we see some of them coming around and helping. So the devil doesn't have absolute authority or control over these empires. We see Cyrus rebuilding the temple. We see Nebuchadnezzar in a very bold declaration that Daniel's God is God. And so there's moments in time where the Lord touches these leaders, and then there's others that are horrific, like Antiochus Epiphanes. So I recognize that the Byzantine Empire was viewed as a Christian empire, but I'm speaking more in the sense of deception in the way Jews are treated in the, I believe it was the 5th or 6th century, right in that time frame. The Byzantine Empire slaughtered many Jews because they wouldn't convert to Christianity, and so this clearly is not a Christian thing. The final empire, again, is a revived Islamic caliphate. That's how I see it. not a revived Rome. Remember, we're talking about a worldview of global dominance combined with a real hatred of Israel. And right now, that's in the House of Islam. So a revived a revived Ottoman Empire fits with the continuity of that, the timeline of the statue and also the motivation. Verses 7 through 12, there's war in heaven, and a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was there a place found for them in heaven any longer. So again, now we've moved completely into a future event, because we're talking about the enemy being cast down. Right now, the enemy has access to heaven to accuse us. And there's coming a time when he's not going to be able to do that, but his full attention is going to be given to us, which the preachers that got excited and called the devil names and stupid and split hoof and all this kind of stuff, I think if they're still around when this event takes place, they're going to recognize that he's a very powerful being that doesn't deserve our respect as in the way we respect the Lord, but he deserves our respect in the way he was respected by the angel when the angel said, "The Lord rebuke you." And I think we need to move into the safety of it's the Lord's battle, not ours. And when it comes to this level. Sorry, I got carried away there. Good read. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, have been cast down, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." So we're going to find out as we continue reading, there's a war in heaven, there's also a war on earth, and it seems that these heavenly battles are mirrored on earth. So for example, when we see Daniel and he's given a revelation about Persia and the principality, the demonic prince over Persia and the demonic prince over Greece coming and making war, I think what we're seeing is heavenly conflict that is being mirrored by an earthly conflict, because Greece did conquer Persia. So again, chapter 12 is challenging in that we're given some big picture elements that don't allow us to chart the timing of this chapter. So I'm not a big fan of we've talked before, I'm not a big fan of the timelines and the charts. I think that they kind of force us to do things that are unnatural in some of these passages. So the birth of Jesus, his ascension, his return, Israel replied, are now war in heaven, and followed by severe persecution. This is all being presented. So there are two archangels, Michael and Satan. There are two armies, heavenly angels and fallen angels, or what many would call demons. I believe these are principalities referred to by Paul in Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against the powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So he's not talking about politics. He's not talking about the media. He's talking about demonic principalities and powers. We don't fight the human element with spiritual warfare. We fight the element of darkness that's behind it. Our goal has to be to do war with the elements of darkness to free the human element with the gospel, with the truth. So Satan and these principalities, again, have access to heaven right now, but time is coming when they'll be cast to earth. Again, it's a future event near the end of the stage, or the last 42 months in that time frame. So this accuser who loses his place because of his own pride has already been overcome by the believers. we have overcome him by what? So I think this is what's inserted here, because this idea of overcoming is presented to the 7 churches, that we're all called to overcome. And now he's telling us how we overcome. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of our testimony, and that we don't love our lives unto death. And I think it's easier for us to quote the first 2 and leave the third one off, but they all need to be there held equally. So there will be many martyrs during the Great Tribulation. And I'm convinced, in my heart, I'm convinced that we should not be preparing to leave, but we should be preparing to lay down our lives for the gospel. The Great Tribulation will be incredibly difficult, to say the least. Okay, and then just to bring this into a close, the final verses 13 through 17, talking about persecution. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and half a time again, 3.5 years from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went out to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So I think we see Satan's hatred for Israel really being on full display here. And because it was revealed that through Israel, through Abraham's line, would come the one who would crush the serpent's head. So Jesus Christ, of course, is that one who's born to accomplish this task. Israel is supernaturally protected, so his evil is turned toward the church. You know, remember, the Antichrist sets himself up in the temple. Appears to me that's what the scripture is indicating, and so we're looking for a 3rd temple to be built, and there's going to be the morning and evening sacrifice. I'm not sure it's going to be a sin offering. It may just be a thank offering. I don't really know all that. There's people that talk about all that. Not every offering in the Bible was given for sin. Many different kinds of offerings, but whatever. There's going to be I think there's going to be the reestablishing of the temple, and the enemy is going to come against the Jews first in the Holy Land, and then he's going to turn. He's not going to succeed. The Jews that are in Judea, that part, you know, when you see these things, Jesus said, flee. So there's going to be that mass exodus of Israel out of their promised land, and I believe they're going to the country of Jordan. I believe that's why God has the country of Jordan. It's identified as Ammon, Moab, and Edom, but it's the country of Jordan today. And how does that little country that's, I don't mean to diminish it, it's an important and prophetic scripture, but how does that little country escape this mighty world ruler? There can only be one reason, is because of God. And so he's kept them as a close safety, place of safety, like a wilderness of refuge, if you want to call it, but a place for them to go. And no matter what he does, he can't pursue them there. So I don't know all of how what that's gonna look like. I can't really say. It appears to me from this passage that it's supernatural, and he realizes that it's God that's keeping him. Remember, the serpent knows who God is. He believes and trembles. It doesn't do him any good. But the Antichrist and the serpent, they're just going to go crazy and turn against everyone, even the ones that brought him into their place of power. But he's really going to go after the rest of her offspring, which it feels like there's 2 groups that he's talking about in verse 17. It feels like he's talking about the Jews and I mean, not the Messianic Jews, the ethnic Jews, and the church. And so I just feel like I need to say this right here. It talks about keeping the commandments of God and having the testimony of Jesus Christ. Some of what's being presented today as Christianity, where commandments don't matter anymore, they're not a means of salvation. I don't think anybody's arguing for that. But we are supposed to keep them. If we look at the 10 Commandments, and even if we distill those down to the 2 that Jesus talked about, loving God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Of course, if you do those, you're not going to break the first 10, the 10. But there's no place in Scripture that says that those aren't important or they don't matter. When it talks about the law passing away, it's talking about the sacrificial system, the dietary rules, and all of that kind of stuff that really uniquely identifies Israel. And then in Acts 15, the argument should be settled from there. The Jews, they're Messianic Jews, but they want to keep Torah, they want to keep Sabbath, they want to keep the dietary laws, they want to be circumcised, they want to do all those traditions. That's okay, but we don't have to. And that's the point. It's not really for us to say you can't. If you do, you're in trouble. And it's not for them to say you must. Again, that was settled in Acts 15 in the Council of Jerusalem. I like to leave it there. So, Israel again is supernaturally protected. I don't think we should forget the religion that wrote, kill the Jew on Saturday and the Christian on Sunday when we think about this scripture. So those who follow Jesus will be persecuted by the serpent. The last 3.5 years is really going to be tough for Christians. And I just want to say again, in closing, we need to overcome. We need to learn to overcome now. We need to not be thinking about what's the next thing that's going to happen right before we leave. I believe that the return of Jesus and our catching up to him is those events are together. They're not separated by 7 years. So I'm just going to leave you with that one more time and say God bless you, and I hope you enjoyed the studies. Go ahead and read ahead in Revelation, and we'll catch you soon. Bye.